My name is Martha Turner. I'm 68 years old, and until that afternoon, I thought I understood my place in my son's home. I cooked, cleaned, and helped raise their boy while David and his wife, Cynthia, chased their careers. I told myself I was useful. I told myself they cared. It was raining that day, one of those slow, gray Midwest rains that soak everything down to the bones. The house smelled of bleach and leftover coffee. I'd been coughing since morning, dizzy enough that I had to grip the counter to stay steady. The sink was full of dishes, and I was halfway through wiping the stove when Cynthia's heels clicked into the kitchen. She looked at me, then at the wet floor. "Are you done yet?" she asked, her voice sharp as glass. I opened my mouth to answer, but a coughing fit stopped me. Cynthia sighed, grabbed the mop leaning against the wall, and threw it at my feet. The wooden handle hit my shin and clattered across the tile. "Stop faking sick," she snapped. "Can't you see the floor's dirty?" For a second, I just stared at the mop lying there, water pooling around it. My hands were shaking so badly I could hear the metal rings of my bracelet clicking together. David was in the living room, his eyes on the TV, pretending he hadn't heard a thing. My grandson, little Eli, sat cross-legged on the carpet, headphones on, lost in a cartoon. Something inside me cracked. 10 years of silence. 10 years of service without thanks. All of it folded into that one humiliating moment. I picked up the mop, leaned it against the counter, and said quietly, "You don't have to worry about the floor anymore." Cynthia frowned, confused. I walked past her, slow and steady, grabbed my coat from the hook, and stepped outside into the rain. That was the night I decided I'd rather face an empty house than stay invisible in a full one. The rain followed me all the way to the bus station. I didn't take much, just a small suitcase, a photo of my late husband, and the last of my savings folded into an old wallet. The man at the ticket counter looked surprised when I asked for a one-way ticket to Cedar Grove, the little town I'd left 40 years ago. The Greyhound was half empty. I sat by the window and watched the city lights fade behind a curtain of rain. Every ache in my body reminded me of how long I had been standing at that kitchen counter, how long I had been waiting for someone to notice I was tired. I thought about the years after my husband, Harold, died. How David begged me to move in so I wouldn't be lonely. "You'll always have a home with us, Mom," he said, and I believed him. The bus rolled into Cedar Grove just after sunrise. The air smelled of wet soil and pine trees. My old farmhouse sat at the end of a dirt road, sagging like an exhausted animal. The paint had peeled off, and weeds grew high enough to brush my knees. When I pushed open the back door, it let out a groan that echoed through the empty rooms. "Martha?" a voice called from the yard. I turned and saw Dr. Walter Hayes, our old family doctor, standing by the gate with his cane. His hair had turned snow white, but his eyes were still sharp. "Well, I'll be damned. I thought I was seeing a ghost." I laughed weakly. "Guess ghosts come back when they have nowhere else to go." Walter frowned when he saw my face. "You look pale. Come on, I'll make you some tea." He and his son, Ben, helped me get the house livable again, fix the locks, patch the roof, even replace the broken water heater. Walter's daughter-in-law dropped off casseroles every evening for the first week. That small kindness, after so many years of cold silence, nearly broke me. Once the house was quiet, I started cleaning out the old cupboards. That's when I found a dusty wooden box tucked behind a stack of yellowed linens. Inside were glass jars, a stone mortar, and a faded notebook full of handwritten recipes, my mother's and mine. Tomato relish, apple butter, chili jam. I hadn't touched them since Harold died. I sat at the kitchen table and ran my fingers over the pages. The handwriting wobbled. The paper smelled faintly of cloves. My throat tightened. "Well, Harold?" I whispered. "Maybe it's time I did something for me." The next morning, I walked to the small general store in town and bought peppers, onions, and vinegar. The cashier, a young girl with a pierced eyebrow, smiled at me. "Doing some canning?" she asked. "Something like that," I said. "Back home." I scrubbed the old kitchen until it gleamed. Then I chopped the peppers, my hand steady for the first time in months. When the mixture hit the pan, the air filled with the sharp, sweet smell of chili and sugar. The sound of it bubbling was almost like laughter. I poured the sauce into mason jars, sealed them, and lined them on the windowsill to cool. The sun broke through the clouds for a brief moment, striking the glass and turning the jars into glowing rubies. That weekend, Walter stopped by again. "What's this?" he asked, picking up a jar. "Just an old recipe," I said. "Want to try?" He dipped a spoon and tasted it. His eyebrows shot up. "Martha, this is incredible. You could sell this at the farmer's market. People around here love homemade stuff." I shook my head. "It's just something to keep my hands busy." But Walter didn't let it go. He told the clerk at the town hall about my sauce. And a week later, a man from the farmer's market came by with a flyer. "You should bring a few jars next Saturday," he said. "We'll give you a small table." That night, I stood by the stove, holding one of my jars to the light. For the first time in 10 years, I wasn't thinking about what anyone else needed. I was thinking about what I wanted, outside. The cicadas sang in the trees, and the farmhouse no longer felt empty. It felt alive again. At dawn, I packed a small crate of jars into a wicker basket and set it by the door. My hands trembled, but not from weakness this time, from excitement. I didn't know it yet, but that basket was the beginning of everything that would come next. The morning of the farmer's market. I woke before sunrise. The air smelled of dew and soil, and a faint mist rolled over the fields behind my house. I loaded my wicker basket, 12 jars of chili sauce, 6 of apple butter, and a folded paper sign that read, "Martha's Homestead Sauces." My heart beat fast the whole drive into town. The market stretched along Main Street, rows of tables under white tents. People sold everything from fresh eggs to hand-knitted scarves. My little booth was wedged between a honey farmer and a woman selling candles that smelled like cinnamon rolls. I laid out my jars, set a few toothpicks for tasting, and waited. For the first hour, nothing. Folks walked by, glanced, smiled politely. I started to wonder if I'd made a mistake. Then a woman with silver hair stopped. "That smell, what is it?" she asked. "Homemade chili sauce," I said, handing her a sample. She tasted it and let out a soft laugh. "Oh, honey, that's real food. How much?" $10 a jar, I said timidly. "That's a steal. I'll take 3. Within minutes, a small crowd gathered. They asked about the recipe, about me, about the story behind the name. "It's just my kitchen," I told them, "and a few old family recipes." By noon, every jar was gone. I sat there, stunned, holding a wad of small bills that felt heavier than it should have. Walter stopped by to check on me. When he saw the empty table, he grinned. "Told you so," he said. The next week, I made double the amount, then triple. The market manager offered me a permanent spot. People began pre-ordering by phone. The town paper ran a small feature, "Local Widow's Homemade Sauce Wins Hearts." Then, one afternoon, I got a call from a woman named Laura from Channel 9 News. "We're doing a segment on rural entrepreneurs," she said. "Would you mind if we stopped by for an interview?" I almost said no. The idea of cameras in my messy kitchen made me nervous, but Walter nudged me. "Say yes. Martha." The world could use more stories like yours. The news crew came the following week. I wore my cleanest apron and baked an apple pie just to make the house smell good. They filmed me stirring a pot of chili sauce, asked about my late husband, my son, and what inspired me to start again at my age. I tried not to cry when I said, "Sometimes you have to lose everything to remember who you are." The segment aired on a Friday night. I didn't think much of it until the phone started ringing the next morning. Orders poured in from neighboring towns, then from cities I hadn't visited in decades. I shipped jars in recycled boxes and scribbled thank you notes by hand. 3 weeks later, a black SUV pulled into my driveway. I recognized it instantly. David stepped out first, dressed in his business casual khakis. Cynthia followed, sunglasses on, arms crossed. Little Eli trailed behind them, dragging his backpack. "Mom," David said, walking up with that practiced smile of his. "You've been busy." "I have," I said carefully. "Want some coffee?" He waved the offer away. "Cynthia and I were talking. We think your sauce business has potential, real potential. I have contacts at the regional supermarket chain. With some proper branding, this could go statewide." Cynthia's voice chimed in, smooth but sharp. "You can't do this alone. Martha, you're working out of a farmhouse. You need management, marketing, quality control." "I see," I said. "And you'd handle all that?" David nodded eagerly. "Of course. We'd set up an LLC in your name, but we'd manage operations. Think of it as family teamwork." It should have sounded like help, but every word felt like another chain around my neck. I took a deep breath. "I appreciate the offer," I said, "but I'm fine where I am." Cynthia blinked. "You're refusing help?" "I'm not refusing help," I said evenly. "Just not that kind." Their faces hardened. Cynthia turned to David. "Let's go. She'll change her mind once she realizes she's out of her depth." They left without saying goodbye. The dust from their tires still hung in the air when Walter came by. He found me sitting on the porch, a jar of sauce in my hands. "They offered to take over," I told him. He nodded slowly. "And you said no?" "I did." Walter smiled. "Then you just made the most important business decision of your life." That night, I stood in my kitchen surrounded by jars cooling on the counter. The radio played a slow country song, and the smell of simmering tomatoes filled the air. For the first time, I didn't feel like someone's mother or someone's burden. I felt like me. But peace never lasts long, not when others can't stand to see you standing on your own. It started with a knock on the door one cold Tuesday morning. I was labeling a new batch of jars when 2 men in gray jackets flashed their badges. "Iowa Department of Health," one said politely. "We've received a complaint about your production process." My stomach dropped. They inspected every inch of my kitchen, took notes, photos, measured temperatures, even swabbed the counters. I stood by, hands trembling, heart thudding in my throat. "Nothing personal, ma'am," the taller one said as he closed his clipboard. "But since you're producing commercially without a certified facility, we'll have to issue a temporary shutdown. You can appeal once you're up to code." When the truck pulled away, I sank into a chair and stared at the quiet, empty space. The jars that had once gleamed like jewels now looked like evidence of a crime. Walter came as soon as he heard. "We'll fix this," he said. "I'll talk to the town clerk. There's a grant for small food producers. We can get you licensed." But all I could do was shake my head. It's over. Walter. They'll never take me seriously again. That night, exhaustion took me under. I remember trying to stand up from the couch, then nothing. When I opened my eyes, the ceiling above me was white. Machines hummed softly. My wrist itched from the IV line. Walter sat beside the bed, his hands folded. "You fainted," he said gently. dehydration and stress. You've been pushing too hard. I tried to laugh, but it came out as a sob. They shut me down, Walter. Everything I built, it's gone. He squeezed my hand, then we'll rebuild it. Properly this time. Over the next few weeks, he helped me apply for the necessary permits. We turned the old shed behind my house into a certified kitchen, stainless steel counters, proper ventilation, temperature logs, inspection certificates. The clerk at the county office even smiled when she stamped my papers. "You're official now, Mrs. Turner. Congratulations." The day the new sign went up, Martha's Homestead Foods, licensed and approved, I felt a spark of hope. But business had vanished. Orders stopped coming after word spread about the shutdown. I couldn't blame people. Small towns remember rumors better than facts. Then one afternoon, while I was wiping down the counters, I heard a knock. It was Eli, my grandson. His face was pale, his eyes wide. "Grandma, I need to show you something." He handed me his phone. The screen showed an audio file labeled Mom and Dad, MP3. My heart clenched. "Eli, what is this?" He hesitated. "I didn't mean to eavesdrop, that they were yelling and I just hit record, but you need to hear it." I pressed play. Cynthia's voice came first, cold, smug. "I told the health department. She'll have to crawl back. Then we can run it right." David's voice was shaky. "You reported my mother? She's using a home kitchen. It's illegal. We're saving her from herself." A pause. Then a sharp slap. My stomach turned. "Don't you ever talk about her like that again," David shouted. The recording ended with silence. I realized I'd been holding my breath. Eli looked terrified. "Please don't tell Mom I showed you." I hugged him tight. "You did the right thing, sweetheart." That night, the phone rang. David. His voice was unsteady. "Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't know what she'd done. I filed for divorce." I didn't know what to say. For years, I had dreamed of hearing him defend me. But in that moment, I only felt tired. "Come visit when you can," I said softly. "Bring Eli." When they came a week later, the boy ran through the field behind my house, laughing as if a weight had been lifted from his little shoulders. David helped me paint shelves in the new kitchen. He didn't speak much, but when we stopped to rest, he said, "You were right, Mom." I lost sight of what mattered. We didn't need to say more. By spring, the TV reporter from Channel 9 called again. "We heard you're back in business, stronger than ever. Can we do a follow-up?" When the news segment aired, it showed my shiny kitchen, my neighbors volunteering to pack jars, and the sign above the door. The anchor smiled and said, "Sometimes the heart of a community beats inside a single kitchen." That night, my phone buzzed nonstop, orders, messages, congratulations. Even the mayor sent a note, "Proud of you. Martha, you've put Cedar Grove on the map." For the first time in months, I slept without worry. The nightmare was over, or so I thought. Because in the Midwest, spring can turn cruel, and when the rains came again, they didn't stop. At first, it was only a drizzle, soft and harmless, but by nightfall, the clouds had turned heavy and bruised, and the rain came down with a vengeance. The radio crackled with warnings. Flash flood alert for Cedar Grove County. I watched through the window as the creek behind the house began to swell. The water that had always been my quiet companion now churned like a living thing, clawing its way toward the yard. I could feel it in my bones. Something terrible was coming. Inside my workshop, rows of gleaming jars stood ready for next week's deliveries. I had spent months rebuilding after the shutdown, after the rumors, after everything. And now, as thunder cracked overhead, It felt as if nature itself wanted to test me again. By midnight, the wind roared like a train. I waded through ankle-deep water, trying to lift boxes onto higher shelves. The current pressed against my legs, cold and merciless. The next moment, a section of the wall gave way with a splintering crash, and a surge of muddy water rushed in. I screamed for help, but the storm drowned out my voice. The last thing I saw before the darkness took me was the glow of headlights cutting through the rain and Walter's voice shouting my name. When I opened my eyes, I was in the hospital. The room smelled of antiseptic and rain. David sat beside me, his eyes red from lack of sleep. Walter stood by the window, still in his muddy boots. "The workshop?" I whispered. David hesitated. "It's gone, Mom. The flood took everything." For a long moment, I couldn't speak. I'd lost things before, my husband, my health, my home, but this time the ache was quieter, deeper. "Then maybe," I said finally, "it's time to stop fighting the river." Walter stepped forward. "Or it's time to rebuild higher up." He placed a folder on my lap. Inside were papers, bank drafts, and a hand-drawn sketch of a new facility. "I'll invest. We'll make it official. Martha's Homestead Foods, LLC. You'll own most of it. But this time, it'll be floodproof." Tears blurred my vision. "Walter, that's too much. I can't—" "You can," he interrupted gently. "This isn't charity. Martha, it's belief." David nodded. "He's right. Let us help you, Mom. You've carried everyone else long enough." I reached for both their hands, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. The weeks that followed were chaos wrapped in grace. The whole town turned out to rebuild. Neighbors, farmers, high school kids, even strangers from nearby counties arrived with hammers and gloves. Someone donated lumber. Another lent a generator. The mayor secured a grant for small rural businesses, and the church hosted bake sales to raise funds for new equipment. One afternoon, as the crew hoisted new beams into place, I stood in the muddy yard, watching the structure rise again. The sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days, and the light spilled across the half-built walls like a blessing. By late summer, the new building stood proud and solid on higher ground. Cream-colored siding, green trim, wide glass windows that gleamed in the sun. The air inside smelled faintly of vinegar and pine from the freshly sanded shelves. The reopening drew more people than I'd ever imagined. The mayor came with a pair of giant scissors, and the local TV station set up their cameras. Walter stood beside me, his hand steady on my shoulder. David and little Eli passed out sample jars to visitors, their faces glowing. When the reporter asked what had kept me going through all the setbacks, I paused before answering. "Sometimes," I said, "life knocks you down because it wants to show you who's willing to help you back up." Applause filled the air. The band started playing, and for a moment, it felt like the whole town was breathing in rhythm with me. That evening, after everyone had gone home, Walter and I sat on the porch, sipping tea. The air was cool and clean, carrying the scent of wet earth and tomatoes from the garden. The creek behind the house murmured softly in the dark, tamed once again. "Funny thing," Walter said, smiling. "I thought retirement would be peaceful. Turns out, I'm better at working for a stubborn woman who refuses to quit." I laughed quietly. "Careful, Doc. You might get stuck with me for good." "Wouldn't be the worst fate," he said. Then, after a long pause, "You ever wish you hadn't left the city?" I looked out over the glowing sign that read, "Martha's Homestead Foods." "No," I said simply. "Leaving saved my life." He nodded, and we sat in silence for a while, listening to the crickets sing. The moon rose over the new building, its silver light catching on the windows like a promise. Inside, I could hear David and Eli laughing, real laughter, light and easy. For the first time in a decade, that sound didn't hurt. It healed. Walter set down his cup. "You've come a long way, Martha." "So have you," I said, smiling. He reached over, took my hand, and squeezed it gently. "To second chances. To second chances," I echoed. The night was soft and endless around us. I thought of the mop that once clattered at my feet, the rain that once drove me away, the silence that once felt like exile. All of it had led me here, to this porch, this peace, this life built by my own hands. The creek whispered in the distance, and I whispered back, "Thank you."